What a relief. I was thinking we had this trouble last time. We didn't either use the right URL or get it in time or something. So thanks for opening the room, Scott. How are you?
I am good. Anna's on vacation today, so I'm in charge of Zoom, which likewise I'm relieved to see you both as well.
And Eric, did you happen to come through the calendar invitation that my assistant Rachel sent from my calendar or through the link Scott sent?
The one that Scott sent.
And Scott, did you send it to all participants or only Eric and me yesterday?
Everybody.
Good. We should be good.
Yeah. We uploaded the list of the people there, so Zoom sent those. Should have sent those automatically.
Okay, great. Thanks. We had 3 regrets from participants this week, so we have a really light group. And Scott, I'll introduce the notion of sort of pivoting away from the in-person. And then Eric, I was thinking we'd just kind of tackle the 3 framing questions that was part of our original charge as our agenda, and then
great.
Where the conversation leads us. That sound all right to you, Scott?
Yeah, that sounds great here, and I'm certainly playing catch up since I was not on this. But that sounds great.
The first meeting we had, we just got everybody's sort of general perspective. My colleague Lauren is going to join. She took notes the first time, and we'll take notes again.
Great.
And then let me put those in the chat.
Chris, what's your guess of who's joining us today?
I have the people who are not joining us.
Okay.
Dave Dagler is unable to join. Julia is unable to join. And Representative Sayre is unable to join. Others are presumed to be on their way in, and here they are. Hi, Laura.
Hi, sorry, and I will only be on here for like a short period of time because we've got a cabinet on aging at 2 that I co-chair that I need to join.
Okay, well, we'll get
right. Department of Labor is ably represented with both Mark and Eric. So
great. Hi, Mark. Good to see you again.
Hey, good afternoon, Chris.
I'm glad you changed your Zoom name. That's helpful. Here comes Sam. Hi, Sam.
Buddy.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. And yourself?
Great. Thanks for joining. We got the room opened on time this time, which is good. We're improving our technological performance. Let me check the broader invite. I think we're still expecting a few folks before we open. Let's see, we have Eric and Mark and Sam. We're not, Dave Dagler's unable to join us, and we have Laura. Julia Trujillo is unable to join today, as is Representative Sayre, but we should have Michaela and Warren also joining us. I'm just putting in the chat our takeaways from our first meeting, just high level, and then I'll paste in our proposed agenda for today, or our agenda actually for future meetings. I'm not sure we'll get through all of it today. Also, I want to welcome my colleague Lauren Lulofs to the call. Lauren works with us here at the RU, and I've asked her to help us from an administrative and communications perspective. You want to say hi and introduce yourself, Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren. It's great to be here. I'll be helping to capture any key themes from our discussion and happy to answer any questions or support this group however I can.
Great. Scott, should we open to the last time Lauren was the only member of the public who joined, but I'm sensitive to just sort of starting a public meeting on time, or should we give it another couple minutes for our other participants?
I would suggest getting started. I think Warren Valdamas is the only other person. I know he is periodically traveling.
Okay.
So my suspicion is best to get started here.
Great. Awesome. You want to open that up? And
yeah, I think we are.
Terrific. Great. Well, thanks for being together, everyone, this afternoon. I appreciate you taking the time for the second meeting of our subgroup of the Governor's AI Task Force on Workforce and the opportunities that we have to advance the state's agenda with respect to AI and the workforce. I want to just acknowledge a couple logistics. One is we have a couple members of our subgroup who are unable to join us today, but I felt like it was important to proceed, just given our charge, to have some discussion over the summer as we plan to reconvene with the broader group again in July and August. So it seemed better to have the meeting today with those that could participate than to reschedule it and cost us maybe another week or two. And I'll brief those that couldn't participate on aspects of our discussion today. Also, Laura has shared in the pre-meeting communication, she's got a conflict that'll have her dropping off here at the top of the hour. And so I want to move us along pretty quickly. Third, in talking with Scott Kleiman from the governor's team, as well as others, you might remember one of the things we decided when we met the first time was that we wanted to have a series of web-based conversations with one another to advance the questions that that we've been charged to consider, specifically how training programs can help Maine people vis-a-vis AI. Are there specific areas of the workforce or policy that maybe we need to focus on from a policy perspective? And how can we include, I know, Sam, this was something in particular you were very sort of focused on in our first meeting. How do we make sure we include members of the workforce in the dialogue and in our recommendations? That's generally speaking our agenda, and you might recall our plan was to work through those questions and others we might generate together over a series of 3 meetings through July. And then at the time we had decided we wanted to converge around an in-person opportunity at Warren Valdamas's office, where we could maybe get together in person and brainstorm a bit. Further conversation has suggested that we want to be sensitive to the amount of time that we're asking of volunteers. And in fact, our colleagues at the state have in mind some in-person sessions a little bit later in the summer. And so it was suggested that we hold off on a half-day in-person commitment as a subgroup, such that we didn't sort of tax too much of busy people's time and calendar, and instead defer our in-person opportunity for when we can get together with the broader AI task force. That seemed very reasonable to me, but I wanted to make sure those of you who participated in that original idea also thought it was a pretty reasonable change to make. And so I'll just ask for feedback along those lines now. Anyone have any concern about foregoing our subgroup in person and instead just concluding our work after 3 virtual meetings and rejoining the broader group? Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. So Scott, that's something we'll make the adjustments, Lauren and I. Those next 2 meetings are scheduled and should be on the calendar. And as I said earlier, I'll catch those who couldn't participate today up on that decision offline, and we'll meet again in, I believe it's in 2 weeks. So for today, just as a recap, what we did last time when we had our first meeting is I think we just broadly got to know each other a little bit in a smaller context. And I recall we had a really rich discussion on the macro question of, opportunities or implications for AI in the workforce. And the takeaways that I have from that meeting is that, there was consensus around the group is that we should reflect on some of the broader presentations we've received and the perspectives that each of us bring in terms of how we're experiencing AI. We should think specifically about the specific ways that AI is already changing the nature of work. And then finally, there was, I think, especially given the rich expertise that we have within this task force, both with respect to the Department of Labor and our labor representatives and members of the labor community in the workforce, we should think really, really specifically about what it means for jobs of the future and how are roles changing. And those are sort of macro takeaways from a preliminary discussion that we all had. What I thought we might do today is just tackle, one at a time, the three questions or one of the three questions, if we only get through one, that the broader task force had proposed we consider as a subgroup. So those questions are how Maine's job training programs help Maine people be highly qualified for roles created or changed by AI. Are there areas where Maine's workforce, that's the first question. The second, are there areas where Maine's workforce systems or policy may need to evolve to respond to AI-driven job opportunities or disruptions? And then the third question would be, how can workers be included in efforts to monitor and respond to AI's workforce impacts? And so I've put those three questions in the group chat that we're sharing as presenters, if you need to reference them there. Does anyone have a particular preference for which one we begin with today in terms of discussion? I'm comfortable going in any of those three directions. Maybe Laura, since you have to leave us, is there one you'd like to start with?
I think I'd start with 3. How can workers be included in the efforts to monitor and respond? And one of the reasons I wanted to start there is because it's probably the one that feels the most concrete to me and the area that I've heard the most about.
Yeah.
And in particular, here at the department, there are lots of questions, particularly from our Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, about making sure that folks with disabilities are not left behind. They're not seen as some sort of an afterthought. So how do we make sure that that any of the opportunities are available to all workers, and that frequently what happens is that a new innovation happens and then you start thinking afterward about who gets left out. So at this time, it's like, okay, who normally gets left out? How do we make sure that they're front and center as we're looking at this new opportunity?
That's a great observation. So we might think about proposing a specific and proactive way to intentionally pursue certain perspectives, including those typically not in the maybe the more top of mind perspectives about where to start on something like this.
I wanted to check in. A couple weeks ago, Scott and Dan had sent out a survey that they're hoping to get public responses to just regarding the implementation of AI. And I was really pleased to see that go out and was kind of curious what the next steps are for that and what kind of response rate you've seen so far.
That's a great question, Sam. I don't have access to it yet. And so I have a request in to see where it's been. When I checked last week, we were doing pretty good in terms of responses. I think we'd given people towards into next week for that. So as we get those results, we'll pull that together. And the intention is to share that amongst the task force members for so you all have it as input to be considering here.
Can you?
That's great.
Who did that go to broadly? Just
So
general.
So it lives on our website. It's been something that went out. There's an interested parties list that that GoCook maintains for the task force, and so it was shared with that. It's also been something that as we've talked to people at conferences and people who've also reached out directly to GoPIF, asking about the task force and how to give feedback to it. That has also that's been a place that we've directed them to. So it's I'd say that the one, or not the caveat, but it is not necessarily sort of a representative survey as much as more of a public comment sort of portal in that. And we asked people both for there's some quantitative questions and then also some very open-ended qualitative questions about opportunities, about concerns, about applications as well.
Yeah, so for example, we hosted an event at our campus here in Portland last Friday that drew 400 primarily representatives from companies either with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce or the Portland City Chamber of Commerce. And we had a segment of that half-day event devoted to policy implications of AI, and we promoted the public comment period during that window so that folks could be aware of it. That might be something that each of us could do, and maybe a note, Lauren, you could make for other members, is to amplify this survey within our own membership and communities to make sure that we broaden the perspective, generally about the chance to give public comment, and maybe, Laura, even in a targeted way to certain audiences that each of our groups encounter. I don't suppose that is problematic, is it, Scott, from the perspective of soliciting public input?
Oh, that'd be great, and this is indeed the moment to do it, so that you all have a chance to engage with this as well.
Yeah. What more might we say about number 3? How can workers be included in efforts to monitor and respond to AI's workforce impacts? Other ideas or suggestions or observations?
So Chris, when I think about that question, I'm wondering if we have some conduits in place already to connect us with those workers. The things that come to mind are, maybe unions, maybe worker councils, things of that sort that are already organized to represent workers and what's going on with those groups. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. Are there things in place already that we can identify as a way to connect with workers and give them voice?
Yeah. Does the state have any sort of, I think the answer is probably no, but is there any sort of like employer advisory council or a way to sort of activate particularly Maine's largest employers to solicit or make or ask through them to their employees a chance to kind of give perspective and help us with this question? What, maybe not necessarily get a survey out, but necessarily just an open invitation for employers or the people who work for them to give input, given the moment that the government's created around the task force.
I think that's a great question, Chris. And I think each agency probably has their own connections to employers. In the workforce system, there is the State Workforce Development Board that is federally required and the governor appoints, and 51% of the members must be employers. And so the state board has both large employers and smaller employers. But I had been thinking that the state board would be a good place to get the information out. And it also has union representation on there as well. So it does have kind of a cross representation of both worker advocates and employers. And one of the members is, I don't know if she's still the president of the State Chamber of Commerce or not, but is definitely on the executive board. So that would be one way of getting information out.
Laura, do you think the best way to do it and to keep it consistent and easy would be to just amplify this survey that's been created, so we're not creating too many disparate sort of channels of feedback?
Yep, and actually the state board is meeting this Friday at Rue. So,
Oh, you're kidding.
yeah, so,
Are you going to be here?
yes,
Do you know what, is it a morning meeting? I have a busy
it
afternoon
is.
in commencement, but if it's, maybe you and I could both ask them to get the word out.
Yeah, it's yeah, we will be there, and it's definitely easy to get it added to the agenda.
One question I have as we think about how to get the word out about the survey, which I think I agree that that's a good way. Why reinvent the wheel? We've got a good survey. I was impressed with the questions and how it was set up. You know, when I was looking at it and trying to share the word out with some of the unions that we work with, I wasn't sure, or I had some questions from folks who were asking, should we respond to this as a union or should I respond to this as an individual worker? And I think we'll get some different responses, whether it's one or the other. And I think, I don't remember, you know, I haven't looked at the survey in the past week or two, but it would be worth just kind of clarifying our purpose with that. Are we looking for broad organizational perspectives or are we looking for individual anecdotes? Is that going to change the approach that we use to conduct this outreach if it's one or the other or both?
Designed for either, and I think intentionally as we crafted this under David Mary's direction was intended to be something that allowed people to show up in whatever identity, whatever representation they wanted to. So whether it was individually or on behalf of a broader group. So I think intentionally there's not necessarily an answer there, Sam, and this
Okay.
is so this is designed to give lots of different groups, and you all have each experienced how much interest there is in this, and there are lots of folks who want to provide perspective on this, and so this is designed to give lots of different perspectives on this as well. One other thing that strikes me here a little bit, and I think turning to the sort of the substance of question 3 and what are the mechanisms for engaging workers in monitoring AI? I just think the state workforce board's a really nice potential answer to that. That the state workforce board is this mechanism that exists for state workforce policy leaders, for employers, for worker representatives to regularly get together and talk about issues that are affecting Maine's labor markets, and strategies for responding to that. So I can imagine a recommendation from you all saying AI should be a regular topic that the state workforce board is talking about, that the state workforce board is regularly asking Mark Shop to produce data around the impact of AI on its workforce, and that I think Eric, you said to like rather than needing to create a separate wheel, like that is exactly as I think about it. And Commissioner, tell me if this is wrong, but I think about that board as like that is exactly the place where that is designed to have these kinds of policy discussions and sort of shape, kind of provide guidance on long-term issues like that. Is that consistent with how you think about the role of the board, Commissioner?
Yeah, very much so, Scott. It also has, requirements from the federal government on what it needs to do too. That's very, very nitsy. And the board would prefer tackling questions like this to some of the other things that they are required to do. But I think it would be great. And we were actually talking about having Mark come and present the information that he has pulled together on AI and the workforce and get some feedback from them as well.
One other thing that I think is worth flagging as we have these conversations, and it makes me agree that the workforce boards would be a good place to continue these conversations, is that, any survey that we do, like the one that we put out for this one, is just a point in time assessment of something that's moving very, very quickly. I could see people responding in very different ways in 6 months to a year. So we need to set up mechanisms that are going to be ongoing so that people can continue to provide feedback. So I really like the idea of having this be an ongoing topic for workforce boards that they discuss every month, and implementing other structures like that so that we can, continue to collect information, but also be really thinking about the policy measures that are needed as things develop.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Sam used an S after workforce boards. There's a state workforce board, and then there are 3 regional boards, local workforce boards, and they have that same composition of requiring 50%, more than 50% of the board members must be businesses, and then other whether it's service providers, union members, but a different voice. So there is a mechanism to constantly adjust, and the local boards are the ones when you're talking about, I think you didn't use the word disruption, I don't think, but I think one of the things that people are concerned about is that there is going to be some sort of disruption in the workforce and dislocated workers who are going to need new training. And those local boards are going to be the on the ground in interface with those workers and companies going through that. So figuring out how to tie those pieces together does make sense. I don't think it has to be exclusive, but I think that is one good tangible channel to have those conversations and get that kind of feedback.
Well, and Mark and others who have the opportunity to see what's happening in the data in Maine could help us monitor and report on that, and or the opposite effect. I understand the question about disruption from a risk perspective, but I also personally believe that technology will actually more likely create new job opportunity. And it would be really interesting to have some way to kind of constantly be looking for evidence of that in the data and implications for the workforce and workers as it relates to actual data. Scott, we're putting you on the spot a lot because you're the government representative, and in some ways others are here too, but GoPIF, is there, taking your own suggestion and flipping it on your own agency, you're all about the policy for the future. Is there an opportunity to task or within your current mandate to specifically ask for that division to be, to Sam's point about how constantly the change is going to come in this space, to not necessarily create like an AI monitoring board, but is AI or tech transformation in your charge with respect to monitoring evolutions and real-time trends?
I decided to answer that in the way that I think the governor is looking for you all to make recommendations to her about whether it should be. I think it is lined up really nicely that this is, AI is the kind of emerging issue that when it wasn't clear what where that might land for it initially for GoPIF to help support the administration of the state in beginning to get organized there. What sort of how the state handles it long term, I think that certainly could be something where you guys can go write new job descriptions for us if that is where you want to go with this. So it is not, it is not necessarily there, but I think that is exactly the kinds of question ultimately that the governor is looking for advice on is, what sort of resourcing does she need, does the state need in terms of continuing to stay ahead of this issue?
Yeah, I think that's the opportunity, is monitoring it through the data or asking the workforce boards to constantly ask about it and pull it is one perspective, and it's going to keep us maybe current and aware, but it isn't necessarily going to get us ahead of it. And if we have within state government a division that's focused on the future of Maine, it seems like we might want to think about what what that creates in terms of an opportunity for us to make a recommendation about resourcing and being bold and specifically forward in its perspective. You know, if the workforce boards could help us with sort of modern or sort of current day, maybe GoPIF or a different group could be charged specifically to be planning and thinking 1, 2, 3 years ahead as part of its overall mandate, and sharing, much like this task force has done, on an everyday basis, bringing best practices into the conversation of state government and the business community in Maine. I mean, we've all benefited so much from just a few months of meeting and gaining perspectives. I'm thinking of like the great meeting we had with the school teachers, and some of the national perspective that has been presented to us. If that were kind of part of the everyday, and a specific team or function of the state government was tasked to keep us ahead of and competitive, that could be another way to think about this. Mark or Eric, any thoughts from you before we lose the commissioner to her other commitment?
I did want to jump in and offer some thoughts on a model that I think is really helpful and informative, could work well in terms of being integrated into the workforce board, is the approach to piloting AI in a specific context in a way that workers can opt into or not that particular change. And then after that has been implemented, assessing how does it change the day-to-day work, and bringing workers into the conversation to say, what was your experience in this pilot? So a couple of examples that struck me, for example, from a week ago, the demonstration at Maine Health. There was a pilot to introduce an ambient listening tool. Yeah. And the purpose of the ambient listening tool was to really take a lot of a labor-intensive clinical documentation process away from physicians, or at least make that a less time-consuming part of their normal schedule. And it was introduced in a way that allowed clinicians to opt into that. And then part of the demonstration at Maine Health was to have the clinicians share their experiences about what is it like, working with this technology, sharing that with their colleagues to say, this was my experience, is this something you're wanting to opt into? And it wasn't a organization-wide change that was, akin to flipping a switch, for example, but it was an opt-in experience, and it was one in which, at least again, from the perspective of the demonstration at Maine Health, there were some champions of this adoption. Workers were able to share their experiences with one another and then make an informed choice about whether to opt in or not. I think that model is one that would work really well with either the state workforce board or the local boards, or the AI task force broadly, to bring that as an example to employers to say, here's one use case that we piloted. This was the effect, to generate potential other use cases, either in the same industry, in different industries, etc. And that to me is a really helpful way to complement what you see in the data, right? Because often what you see in the data is more of a surface level kind of net changes over time. But the pilot model, making a small incremental change, and then assessing the effect of that, bringing workers into the conversation before you make a decision about scaling that up to other use cases, scaling that up to other divisions, or modeling that for others within the industry to determine if they want to do something similar, I think is a really helpful model for understanding the macro and the micro at the same time of how these technologies are changing the workforce and the needs for workers in this changing environment. So I think that can be done in a way that really incorporates worker voice and the worker experience, and that workers have more of a say in the way that the technology is implemented into their workforce in a way that could potentially benefit them. Because I think there are many ways in which these tools can be a tremendous benefit to workers who in some instances might be, stretched thin, overworked, have too many responsibilities, but some of these tools can be used to leverage and increase worker experience, increase retention, etc. So that to me was a really cool model. I think that could be extended in other industries or settings.
I wonder if there's a way too to create like an incentive or an invitation or an expectation for companies to do that sort of thing. In our organization, when we want to drive an innovation, we put a little resource up and we invite, proposals to gain access to the resource. And it doesn't take long for members of the faculty or staff to really get together, collaborate, either bring forth proposals or bring forth demonstrations of early stage pilots that are working in order to gain resource to take that to the next level. So maybe there's something in our recommendation opportunity here to think about allocating financial resources specifically with proof of concept and inclusion and workforce, demonstrations of best practices that are including workers in the evolution of an AI-driven innovation, and I don't know how the budget works in state government, but some way of sort of making commitments or allocating out certain aspects of the Department of Labor's budget or some other budget specifically to encourage more of this type of behavior, or through a group like MTI, maybe some of its opportunity could be expanded to lean into its innovation mission as well as its new venture creation and sustainability and support mission, or other groups like it. I don't know all the groups in the state that might be the right vehicle, but some sort of a way to take this idea that you're surfacing, Mark, and amplify it and invite more of it, because that one example at Maine Health is probably one of thousands throughout the state.
Exactly. And I'd be willing to bet that other employer representatives that are on the board today or connected to some of these efforts in other ways probably have, many other use cases, dozens of other use cases in the organization that I think could probably benefit many to learn about, just hear about, and again, to bring the worker experience to talk about what was successful or not. And, if whether, the workers that are working with these solutions day to day, did they champion it? Did it improve the quality of their work environment, etc.?
Yeah.
I like the sounds of that, and I wonder if it might be helpful to have like a community engagement specialist on the GoPIF team whose job it is to seek out those stories, to look for examples, to build relationships with employers in a bunch of different areas. Because I worry with the workforce boards, I think it's good to have them thinking about AI and having that as part of their regular agenda. But I also know that if, sometimes when something is everybody's job, it's nobody's job, and it could get kind of, just push down the list of things that they have to do among all the other ticky-tacky stuff that the workforce boards get involved with. So having a engagement person who's really going out proactively to seek out people in the creative industries and people in manufacturing and people in fisheries to think about these questions, I think could really be a good step to kind of institutionalize this and ensure that we can actually access those kinds of perspectives on an ongoing basis.
That's a great, Sam, in this event we had Friday, the Maine State Chamber facilitated a panel that featured sort of more how heritage industries are using AI. And, we're in a pretty unique position at the Rue Institute to feel like we have a good perspective on innovation and what's happening in this space in the state. And the folks from J.D. Irving and Cook Aquaculture talked about what they're doing. And it just blew my mind, and with examples and ideas that I would have never in a million years sort of thought of in terms of where the innovation is coming from. And that's going to reach, I think, to both of your points, it's going to reach a completely different type of company in a different part of the state and a whole variety of Maine workers, with respect to the workforce, that if someone were intentionally looking for those stories, and then that also would feed into an opportunity to I mean, narrative is so important, positioning Maine as not catching up on this topic, but actually sort of in the foreground, leading the way. So I really like the idea of some sort of communication anchored recommendation for us to make, so we can take control of the narrative around this by having more and more of these examples. And that might help to demystify some of the fear too that people have about anxiety around job displacement, or what it means or doesn't mean, things like that. How should we handle the size of our group at this point? I think we've lost our commissioner, and we have, I think, 5. One of the things we decided last time is actually that if 2 or more weren't able to attend, we would look for another meeting, and we scheduled the meetings. And then this week we learned that a few folks weren't able to attend. I'm wondering if we ought to kind of wrap it up a little bit today, and then Lauren and I can go to work on affirming everyone's ability to participate next time, so that this conversation is happening with our full subgroup.
Before we get to that, Chris, I just wanted to add a thought on this discussion.
Yeah.
And thinking about, where Mark and Sam have kind of expanded on this idea and this concept, and I think we're going in a great direction. And it occurs to me, and they've already kind of said this, but it would make sense, I think, to have a formal system or some formal mechanisms in place to create, ongoing surveys and ongoing report outs on these things, and kind of create this feedback loop so that the participants are getting the information back that we're finding, so that they can adjust in real time. And we're going to really provide them some value for their participation as we're developing, our own base of knowledge and ability to interpret it. So, and Mark, Sam's idea of having a person that's really, championing that makes sense. But I think, to create that formal structure where, we know that we're surveying on a regular basis, and we know we're reporting out, and we're measuring things, and really monitoring them, and not only responding, but giving those participants the ability to respond themselves with that information as it becomes available.
Yeah, I mean, it may be, maybe I'm overstating it a little bit, but again, I personally feel like this is one of those areas that are going to fundamentally change the way we live and work. We're living it in real time. So maybe from the state government perspective, attaching an expectation to any organization that receives state funding or falls under some sort of regulatory accountability to the state, to just annually or quarterly, respond to or update on how and in what ways AI is influencing their trajectory, to help this sort of understanding, and hear it organically from it sounds very onerous the way I just framed it. It could be very exciting to write this memo, like, look at what we at Central Maine Power are doing to really lean into the AI age, and having some body, some group, whether it's within GoPIF or DECD or somewhere else, sort of gathering all that information and looking for the synergies. Then I think the government could be in a position, the state could be in a position to also be a proactive convener around things that are really gathering some momentum and really special and exciting. And I would imagine the governor would appreciate having those types of things boil up to her, so that the governor can stay ahead of it.
Yeah.
I know that sounds like more regulation, more reporting, and it probably is, but I meant it more positively than that, not onerously, but as an opportunity or an invitation.
Circle back. This is a slightly different direction I'm going to take it. So, before I do that, any other comments on this sort of feedback loop theme?
None from me.
Then, Mark, I wanted to circle back to what you were describing around the ambient listening sort of documentation tool. And I think part of what I heard you certainly describe is opportunities to elevate tools like that are being used in certain parts of our economy and making sure other parts of our economy are visible. I couldn't tell, to what extent were you also seeing opportunities for that kind of documentation support tool specifically to have application within Maine's public workforce system? Like, as we think about the work that career counselors are doing, or the work that your shop in the Unemployment Insurance Bureau, Eric, are doing, there are lots and lots of people across state government who spend lots of time documenting interactions with clients. Were you also thinking, sort of trying to suggest that could be a place where maybe AI could be deployed into the workforce systems?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of the above. I see that there are benefits to many industries in terms of sharing pilots or success stories that are happening in the state, and then using that as an opportunity to think about how this could be applied to other use cases in other industries. And I see many ways in which in an environment where one of the frequent struggles we have within state government is just the balance between how many resources we do have and our mission to serve as many people as possible and provide excellent and timely service. There are many potential applications that I think could streamline workflows within government and ultimately result in better effectiveness in terms of serving citizens. One that comes to mind is I'll provide you one kind of micro example, which is adjudication within unemployment. And I'm sure Eric can kind of talk about this more precisely than I can, but adjudication is essentially an information gathering process where you have two parties, generally an employer and a worker, and there's going to be a series of questions asked in information gathering sessions, and an adjudicator is ultimately going to try to make a decision about the facts in the particular situation to make an eligibility determination for benefits. And there are lots of ways in which information gathering can occur. Questions can be prompted using AI tools. This is something that's already been developed and deployed in New Hampshire, for example, to gather information, process lots of information, try to find potential inconsistencies within a large set of information. Another potential example is fraud. The Unemployment Bureau has been swamped with fictitious claims that are filed with stolen identities. And it's a highly labor-intensive process to go on a claim-by-claim basis and reviewing indicators of potential fraud. Whereas some of these models, to the extent that we have the right technology solution in place to deploy and provide to our staff, to go and quickly find not only quickly process the known indicators of fraud, but probably identify 100 different indicators of fraud that we don't even know today that are highly suspicious in terms of the claims information. So absolutely, I think all of the above. It could be a benefit. It could inform leaders in other industries. These could be tools that would result in better service from government, more efficient use of our resources. And I think it would be informative. One of the challenges from a workforce training perspective is, we have programs available to support workers through retraining, and we want, as much as possible, we want employers to, and this is one of the charges of the workforce board, is to engage the employer to community to tell us more about training needs. What are the skills that are really important to your organization that could involve the way that AI is being deployed? How is the training system today potentially misaligned with the training of what you are looking for as an organization? So, across the spectrum, I think there's potential benefit.
I want to follow up on that. I mean, I see a huge range of potential benefits for all the things that you talked about, Mark. I mean, I can just imagine how much more easily you can collect data on any number of things, and it's going to make the work of state workers and folks in a variety of sectors easier. I also have some reservations, or I guess we just need to be thinking about cybersecurity in this context. If we're collecting a vast amount of data that may greatly exceed the amount that we could have collected in an analog context where people are sitting down as case managers to talk to folks in, various contexts, child protective services, whatever it might be, there's a lot of very sensitive data that I see with the increase of AI, utilization of AI by bad actors, it will be harder to protect that data. I'm thinking of the hospital hacks that happened at St. Mary's and Central Maine this week that are affecting a lot of folks that I know in the Lewiston Auburn area. And so I think like we have to be really careful about how we protect the data if we are going to collect a vast additional amount of data on folks that wouldn't have been feasible to collect without the use of AI.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on. I was thinking a lot about that when we were doing our visit at Maine Health, and both on the data security front, but there's also an element around like data retention rules. And I mean, what I understand is for some of the ambient transcription tools in healthcare, they have rules that basically keep that data on hand for a very limited amount of time, hours to days, but then that is regularly purged. So the only records that exist are the chart notes. It seems really important to get that data retention policy right up front as part of that data security strategy that you were describing. Sam, as more data is collected.
Maybe there's a recommendation in our opportunity here around, the governor directing state agencies to deploy first steps in this direction with the appropriate securities and privacy protections, but to make it sort of as fundamental as, kind of the basic human resources, protections and expectations of any division would also be to develop a plan to use AI and emerging technologies to improve the way that Mainers interact with their governments and to assess and synthesize the findings of those interactions. I think it's a really, really smart. I wasn't thinking that, Scott. I'm really glad you asked about it. But the implications for this particular question, how do we include people in this conversation? Just literally thousands of conversations happening every hour across the state that could be assessed, and it could be opt-in, it could be not allowed in certain environments, not with minors, not with, legal, so all the appropriate kind of safeguards TBD by the responsible agency, but to have a plan by such and such a date to get started down this path might be one sort of a macro recommendation.
I also wonder, in the context of this question around having workers be included, you broaden that out a little bit, that I can imagine there being a lot of value in having a citizen advisory function specifically around AI governance and data governance. And as those rules are set up at the enterprise level, I'm not aware that that's something that regularly happens right now. And I think, to this discussion around the increased amount of data being collected, the increased vulnerability of that data, that choices being made around governance policy, it is important. It will be really valuable to be getting citizen input on a lot of those choices from a governance perspective down the line. Mark, you are probably the person between me and you and Eric are dealing with a lot of different data sets sort of regularly. Do we have an existing protocol around sort of citizen input for data governance stuff that you've come across that I'm not aware of or not thinking about?
Yeah, so so there's a couple of things there. There are within government, we are able to use a small set of low cost tools, primarily ChatGPT, the free version of ChatGPT. But something that's really important within much of the data that we collect, store, and manage across state government is has protections, sensitive information that would strictly prevent any interaction between an open model and information that is specific to citizens, businesses, workers, job seekers, etc. Any type of individual level of information. Is a strict policy that would prevent any of that information being an input to an open source model. So if within state government, if we were to go in the direction of having some of these tools interact directly with our databases, it would have to be within a completely closed environment. It would have to be the case that any technology that's deployed, it would have to be, ideally, it would have to be trained using our data. It would have to be trained using vetted documentation, accurate information that is all verified by people that have a sufficient amount of subject matter expertise. And that environment would have to be entirely closed off. None of the basically none of the prompts or interactions with that particular language model would ever be allowed to leave that language model. For example, it would never be allowed to inform another use case of that model being used by some other client or some other customer. For example, it would have to be something that lives within our data systems, is completely closed off, and we own it for it to have the kind of impact that I was describing before. So in order to make that happen, I think the biggest obstacle is just the resources that we would need. The example that we saw within Maine Health, the Epic system, Maine Health has of course invested in a platform, a health management data platform that has a lot of really sophisticated functionality and security that's specific to the needs of the healthcare sector. It would be incumbent upon, the Department of Health and Human Services or DECD or Department of Labor, right, to go and procure with a vendor equivalent to Epic or whoever the best vendor would be for that particular product. It would be particularly costly, and you'd have a lot of instances where you'd have, like a team of like the adjudicators within Eric's team. They have a really specific need. They have a really specific type of data. They have laws that govern the work that they do, et cetera. But it's not an efficient use of resources. There's no economies of scale if there's a solution that's procured for adjudicators, and then a separate solution is procured for the Office of Family Independence over in DHHS, et cetera. So I think it's hard for us to take advantage of the economies of scale, given that we have a narrow charge. We have these kind of individual data silos that collect and manage data and have really strict security protocols in place governing who can see that data and making sure that that doesn't interact with any other type of environment or use case. So I think we just have a lot of resource constraints and a limited ability to take advantage of economies of scale.
I think that's an opportunity if you look at this is way easier said than done, right? Especially given what you just said, Mark. But particularly these tech companies that are investing literally billions in product development and ideation, to be the design partner as a state government for one of these tech firms to help them figure out how to build programs and services that all states and people could benefit from could be tremendously valuable. And it might be a way, quite literally, to attract significant investment, just to use kind of just a theoretical example. If we or the governor were to approach OpenAI or any of its competitors, Microsoft, you name it, and say, like, we want to work with you to deal with all the complexity that you just described, Mark, and build the prototype sort of innovation opportunity for the future that is secure and respects the fundamental and unique role of government, and that's protects privacy and can find a way to make sure that groups that shouldn't have access to certain information don't, but also then provide that overlaying opportunity for synthesis and observation that would help us become so much more efficient and, blah, blah, blah. That I don't personally know of any state that's rolled out that invitation that's doing it on such a grand scale. That might be a way to put Maine on the map from a leadership perspective while attracting significant economic investment, right? Build a division of XYZ Corp in Maine to do that, create Maine jobs to do that. That might be worth a lot to certain companies that are trying to do that, because if they can get it right for us, they can replicate it worldwide.
Really interesting. I think there's a possibility that sort of next task force meeting is on AI and government. So some of these things will come up, and one of the examples that we'll be sharing and potentially be hearing from is the city of Corona, California, that has built out a new AI application for streamlining housing production permit reviews. And they basically did what you just described, Chris, that they have been, they developed a contract with the vendor that is a shared risk model where for some of the early stage, they are functionally not paying or competing that in the way that they would, but in return, they're getting this product to developed with and for them, which I think is exactly what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept, but I wonder, like, who holds an agency or a company like that accountable if something doesn't go the way it should? With permitting, for example, you go to the planning board. You can vote for new counselors who are going to appoint new planning board members. You can call them up, and they're community members. So there's accountability. Where when it's an outside agency that they've contracted with, it's much harder to have that layer of accountability. So I do wonder how you would achieve that. And if we are thinking that direction, we should think on the front end about how that accountability would be institutionalized.
And this is the challenge with me, Sam, is I always forget the unique realities of government as compared to sort of private sector. And it's a lot harder for the reasons that you acknowledged and raised right there for sure. So, but I think to Scott's example, other cities and states are going to do it. And so if we're not trying to answer that question, we may be missing the opportunity and be just in the customer position 3 years from now instead of the leadership position or the design it, to our use case opportunity.
I think one thing go ahead, Scott.
No, just to pull sort of those two comments together. One theme I hear from both of those is regardless of the specifics, I think both of those comments implicitly acknowledge that the traditional procurement methods that state governments use to buy technology, do innovation projects, may be especially creaky, painful, inappropriate for this new world, and the state may need to innovate on procurement methodology, procurement contracts, and come up with new procurement and contracting tools that address the specific opportunities and challenges of these AI applications.
Oh, I see. Right. As it relates to the business with the safeguards that we're going to be conducting anyway, bring it into a more modern sort of frame or collaborative, tech-oriented approach. Is that what you're saying, Scott?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm hearing from both of you is that the traditional way that the state and really governments in general buy things is they basically put out they identify need, they do about a bunch of planning work to develop a set of specifications that they put into a bid document. They put the document out into the world. They say vendors come bid on this. And then if you're lucky, the bid is evaluated on a best value basis. If you're not lucky, it's whoever came in at the lowest cost. And that model, I think, potentially is pretty constraining for trying to develop sort of new technology tools that may need to evolve, that may need different kinds of public accountability than what has had before. Where there may be value in allowing state agencies to share more risk with private vendors than what typically allows for. So I think that's the theme I was hearing from both of you, but I also may be kind of overstating, I think, what the two of you were thinking.
Sam, do you want to comment on that?
No, I mean, I think you summed it up well, Scott. I mean, it's a complicated process. I'm thinking too about the political challenges of trying to make an agreement with a vendor who would be providing the kinds of services that you were talking about, Chris. I mean, I think back on Angus King trying to get laptops into the schools when that was a cutting edge thing to do in the 90s, and he got raked over the coals for that. And many people continue to criticize Angus King for that, for the relationship with Apple and who benefited, that kind of thing. And there's going to be some suspicion of any kind of arrangement that you make with an outside vendor to do this kind of work. So just thinking about how you can assure the public that it's being done for the right reasons on the front end, I think is really critical if you're not going to get so much pushback that it just doesn't end up being worth the trouble. And I think this is bound to get a lot of pushback, but it doesn't mean it's not worth it. I mean, the other thing I was going to say is, to your point, Chris, that you've made a couple of times that I think is a really good directive for us is to think boldly. And, I grew up in rural Maine, in Brownville, and I know a lot of those places that have just been on the decline for 30 years. And I would love to think about how can we engage with AI in such a way that rural areas are actually benefiting in a robust way, and what would that look like? How would I think it was maybe Jay Brenchick from Auburn who was talking about the infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to make sure that AI can actually benefit those places, whether it's broadband or other tools. But beyond that, just thinking as a workforce subgroup, how can we really push to support rural communities? And if we do decide that we think it would be a good idea for the state to work with a company to develop tools that could improve state governance, like how else could we, specifically focus on workforce development in rural communities and really make that a top priority for us? I don't really know what that looks like, but I just like us to be thinking about that to really, level the playing field that's been between urban and rural Maine that's been kind of tilted in favor of the more urban parts of the state for a long time.
Yeah, maybe the invitation is specifically to create jobs in certain regions of the state, right? If you want the benefit of our data, which is really what the state could offer. And Scott, I appreciate the procurement lens. That would be the way I think to implement what I was getting at. But I think I was thinking a little more macro than that. I was thinking a little more like, we have all this data, and it's data that are so valuable that make the innovation happen. We also have a rural and urban reality that's really interesting. If you think about the range of data that exists, I'm sure, Mark, you could tell us, the data must be very different in different parts of the state, and it's really probably no end to how fascinating it is and what it might demonstrate. That's what's on offer in exchange for building something specific to the state of Maine. And maybe, Sam, to your prior point, I might have probably overstated it, sort of open up the entire state's, data ecosystem, but maybe it's a division. Maybe it's, we start, like the California example Scott used. And in exchange for that, we want you to, do it in, pick a city not in Cumberland County, and create and retrain and do some job development in partnership with the community college system, or state system or something along those lines. I mean, it may be that nobody's really responsive to that, but if you look at, sort of the daily headlines, it seems like every day the state of New Mexico, the state of Utah are kind of rolling out these types of invitations, and really well-resourced companies are making significant financial investments in those states to build things there. This was my attempt to try to think about how we can get Maine in that, and not just build things, but create jobs there, but it certainly would be fraught with peril from the accountability and the cyber and the trust and the sort of unique role of government. But if other states can work through it, I would imagine we can work through some of those things.
And now, Chris, one thing that you've talked about before is looking at some of that opportunity for Maine's rural community around healthcare innovation. And like you and I have talked, about when we look nationally where much of the health innovation with AI is happening, it's largely out of large urban academic health centers.
Right.
And that to me, like, that continues to be something that I think is a really intriguing idea around innovation opportunities for Maine is where can AI help improve rural healthcare delivery? And I mean, particularly in our rural communities, our health is an enormously important.
A rural health demonstration site on all the things that I wasn't able to be with the broader group at Maine Health, but I was in the different subgroup where I learned about that innovation that you described, Mark. But connect all that together and showcase what a network of AI innovation in rural health providers in rural Maine might look like. And maybe that's the more appropriate public-private partnership as opposed to maybe some of the more big tech providers, something more akin to government's mission to care for people around healthcare. Maybe we kind of wrap it for today, given that we have about half of our subgroup. This has been a really fascinating conversation, but half of our colleagues weren't able to benefit from it. So maybe before we tackle a different question, we sunset today. Lauren and I will check in with everyone and make sure we have a meeting next time that doesn't create as many conflicts. I think some of the conflicts emerged, as it does with busy people late in the game here. But we'll double check ahead of the next meeting and reschedule it if necessary, because I think if we're going to use the next two meetings to keep going in a substantive way like this, we want to make sure we have as many of our colleagues involved as we possibly can. Does that sound okay?
Great.
That sounds great. I may not be with you at your next meeting. You will be back in the good hands of Dan. So I may just leave one suggestion, and this is coming to you, Eric. You and I, you had shared some really interesting ideas with me about the RESEA program, RESEA, that provides reemployment support for people when they file for unemployment insurance. And you pointed out that providing rapid hands-on outreach to people when they file for unemployment can be really valuable, but we also have not had resources to reach. We can only reach a very, very small subset of people that file, given the resources that we had. And I got very excited about your idea around could an AI application help expand the reach of something like that. So my suggestion is, like, as you guys get into the next part of these conversations, I think, Eric, you sharing a little bit more about that program, how it works today, and what you could imagine could be a pretty right place for more conversation.
Sure.
And specifically, one of our three questions is workforce systems and policy, so we could tackle it there. And then we can also come back around to, the role of colleges and universities in all this when we talk about training programs, not just colleges and universities, also employers, but especially colleges and universities. So those will be maybe the next two kind of macro questions. And then, Lauren, you before we adjourn, you have you think what you need to synthesize the key takeaways from today? Anything that you need clarification or help with from a notes perspective?
I don't think so.
Cool. Thanks for doing that. All right, everyone. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
you
you.
too.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
But
Thanks for letting me crash.
Thanks for being here.